Welcome to Fight the Good Fight Club, the podcast about the relentless pursuit of a life and relationships filled with purpose, love, joy, and peace. If you're ready to get real and dig deep, then you're ready for Fight the Good Fight Club.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am Cynthia Cintron, your co-host.
And I'm Marcel Pope.
And we have a heavy topic today.
Living with loss.
Oh, this is going to be painful, but it's going to be awesome at the same time.
Hopefully brings a lot of awareness, I believe. And that's the whole purpose.
You know, I find when you and I were talking about this episode, we were rolling around. I thought, wow, how are we going to have our listeners relate to what we're talking about? And then we started going through the stages of grief. And I literally mentally could connect friends, family, myself, you, me, going through these different stages, through different types of losses that we've had in our lives. And I could literally pinpoint and see when I was stuck, when I handled loss and moved through it in a way that now on the other side of it, I feel really healthy with it and I don't feel pain. And I also can pinpoint the losses that I've had that I've not had that move through of the stages. And I can still feel that I'm stuck in some parts. And so I think this is a cool episode.
Yeah, and that's why I think we agreed to name it that rather than it seems like, okay, it's almost like when we're born, right? We're plopped in the middle of a battlefield. It's
like, welcome to the world. Get ready.
And so this whole podcast is about stilling your mind, freeing your spirit, and finding peace within. There's an old Latin saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. But we're already at war, and fighting the good fight in that war is trying to find the peace.
Exactly.
So all these lessons are designed, and again, a lot of them were inspired by, or all of them, A Course in Miracles, which is all about finding the peace within and learning that our minds consist of spirit, a spiritual spirit, and a human spirit. And that's the vacillation that we constantly deal with, the yin and yang and the balance we're always striving for. But
that's just it, right? Yeah. Our spiritual being is in this human body.
That's right.
How many times we have this conversation, you and I, about we're going through something. You're like, well, let's find the peace. And I'm like, yeah, but my human self needs to go through this. It's having a crazy cuckoo moment.
That's right. But finding the peace is the ultimate goal. So to put, like we've tried to do here, the lesson from A Course in Miracles is number 182.
182.
I will be still an instant and go home. And you say, well, how does that relate to living with loss? Well, a big part of this experience in this life, probably arguably the entire experience, is about you experience a loss, you learn to live with it, but ideally it would maybe good to overcome that loss. But usually what happens is we store that loss as a memory, and then we go through our lives afraid that loss will happen again. But it doesn't have to be that specific loss. Loss comes in many forms. And so an analogy would be like death. There's many ways to die, right? You could there's drug overdoses, drive-by shootings. There's people take Tylenol laced with arsenic, didn't know it. I know that's morbid, but so the point, the finality is a person. Death is death.
But there's also the other kinds of death: divorce,
and
losing a job.
You got it. That's
ending a friendship.
I took the words right out of my mouth.
Okay, sorry.
No,
sorry,
go.
sorry.
No, go. We're on the same.
What
way.
else?
Yeah.
Ending a job.
Absolutely.
Ending any kind of phase in your life.
Yep.
Where you feel like you go through all those stages, right?
And death and loss. I mean, death of a dream, right? Death of a hope. Death of a career.
Yeah.
There are many forms of death that usually, almost arguably in every case, results in a feeling of loss, a sense of loss, which is wonderful that you come up with the 5 steps of the grieving process.
Yeah. So what happened was that Marcel and I were talking about this episode, and it popped into my mind that dealing with all of these losses, whatever loss we're going through, really kind of went hand in hand with the 5 stages of grief, which is the model by the Kubler Ross model. So we thought, hey, maybe it would be interesting because I think that people would associate more closely. This is a difficult concept.
It is. And exactly. And the whole idea of the topic here, living with loss, we had talked about there are 3 lives we all have, right? A public life, a private life, and a secret life. And in that secret life, it's not necessarily dirty, mean, or whatever. That secret life is where a lot of lives of quiet desperation are lived. No one wants to share their pain. They're afraid to. They harbor it. They protect that pain in them, which is from loss of some sort. And so that secret life is really what we're trying to become more aware of, that unbeknownst to us is maybe driving us in. And it could drive us in a good way. You and I were talking about, we've always taken our pain and we've converted that negative pain into positive action, but at some point.
But the road to positive positive action sometimes is really complicated. Sometimes it's really easy.
Yeah.
And as we move through this episode and talk about it, we're hoping that our listeners will be able to relate.
Yeah.
And because there have been times, I mean, you don't even realize it, which is almost part of like the first stage. And I don't want to get ahead of us, of ourselves, but I sort of want to set that stage. Like when we're going through, getting ready to go through a loss, we may not know that we're getting ready to go through a loss, but we go into denial. Yeah. And we'll talk about divorce is a prime example where you don't know you're going to divorce. You may deny it. You may be angry about it. You may, go through anger and acceptance and everything else. Then finally you get to that place where you're like, okay, this marriage is over. We're going through divorce. But so we don't always know that we're going through it or that we need to go through it. Sometimes death is the best, most amazing thing possible. My divorce, my marriage.
And when you said that, you meant like divorce or end of a relationship or end of a business enterprise. You didn't mean like our physical death.
Actually.
Well, I mean, it could be, but I personally don't want to promote the idea that, hey, death is
please
good.
don't commit suicide. We're not talking about wanting to end that.
Yeah, and I want to make that clear because I'm not of that mindset.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh. Okay. No. Well, I will tell you, for example, I've had, I know people that have had many, many bouts. Actually, we recently have a family member that had been living with cancer for ages and ages and ages. And it came back, it metastasized and came back. And it was quite beautiful the way she went through hospice. She came into I'm talking about,
up north?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. So, and she is a really spiritual, beautiful, beautiful soul. And she came to an understanding that she was going to go into hospice. She made the decision to stop taking nutrition. Yeah. And they took the feeding tube, and that was her call. And her family came and gathered, and they were able to say goodbye and had a really natural conclusion to a really horrible and painful situation. But it was time, and she knew, and she accepted it. Yeah. And in a really incredible way.
And it's in a way she had an advantage, right? There was time to prepare. There was a warning, and they thought this could come back, and if it does, the whole idea is, another thought that came to my mind was, you've seen there's quite a few musicians who've made their careers out of singing about their pain. Yeah. And then all of a sudden they run out of material, and a couple of killed themselves. Because it's like, okay, I got rid of the pain, or maybe I can't get rid of it. And then, so you and I had talked about that, all the pain through the losses we've suffered, through abandonment, through relationships, all those things, people who should have been there for us and weren't, people who were there supposed to protect us and they didn't. All these things, they are stored in us, and we go through, and that becomes part of a secret life within ourselves that we keep to ourselves. We don't share with anyone, but we harbor that. So,
and we use it as fuel for success.
And we were afraid, okay, what are we going to do if we run out of this fuel? Well, we're running toward the light, but we're also running from the darkness. Yeah. But what if we eliminate the darkness and get rid of all the pain? How do we do? Well, you know what? Then we just run for the light. Yeah. And so, but
this was a real conversation that we had before we started the podcast. We were talking about, what am I going to do if I'm happy am I going to stop being successful because my misery fuels me?
And that's the idea of you're afraid to let your loss go because you think your loss is actually benefiting you, which it does. You know, there are people on TV who have suffered tremendous loss and they took that loss so that others don't have to feel that loss and they come out with preventative measures or whatever. Or maybe, what's that show? Was it where the America's Most Wanted? The story of what happened to his son. Well, he wants to catch people who were perpetrators, like the one who took his son's life. So there's always good can always come from anything, good or bad. But so in purposes of this show, we were really searching for the ultimate, which let's just say that peace within is a good place to be. That way, nothing can bother you. And again, the word within is very powerful because we look for things outside of ourselves. And we find it. It's almost like if you had a box for everything you thought was going to bring you happy. There's a box, and there's that home you want. There's another box, and there's that car you want. Another box, there's all the money you want. Another box, there's a relationship you want. But they're all in boxes outside yourself. All of a sudden, they can all disappear in an instant for different reasons. And if that was your peace and your happiness, you suddenly realize that can be taken from you. We're trying to find the peace within. When you still your mind, this whole idea of living with loss is trying to figure out, am I in a battle I don't even know I'm engaged in, and I don't even once I realize I'm in it or aware of what's going on in me, how do I deal with it? And so that's why A Course in Miracles is really good. In this particular, if you still your mind, most people can't block out the noise because they don't want to. And I should speak for myself.
They're afraid of what they'll find.
They're afraid of what you'll find. And that's why it's easier to project and point and judge and go, oh, look at this person. Because as long as you're casting your attention on someone else, you don't need to cast it on yourself. And so they always say when you point one finger at someone, there's three more pointing back at you. I think all that comes to that. And again, we're trying to find the peace within, and it's always we're trying to get down to the two basic fundamental facets of this life. There are only two. There's fear and there's love. Love is really what everyone really, really deep down wants, because we come from life itself, light and love. So anything in between that is based in fear. So we're trying to uncover the fears that are blocking the light that's coming out of it. And again, back to that central argument or theme or idea, everything that we need is within us. It's not outside of us. So as long as it's in us, home is in there, and that's what the lesson's about. I will be still an instant and go home. Well, you go through hell when you're trying to get to some place that you already are.
Well, sometimes.
So we're already, home is in us. But, right.
Well, getting stuck in other things that sort of take or distract us from the path to home. Yeah, is basically what the good fight is, right? We're sort of trying to figure that out.
The good fight is figuring out what the fight is, first of all. But there is a fight going on. Make no mistake about it.
Always, for sure.
Always, yes.
So, and actually this leads us right into the 5 stages of grief, which continues this conversation.
Sure.
And so...
Because grief follows loss, right?
Right. So, or when you're getting ready to have a loss, right?
Yeah.
So you just touched on, when we're looking at the stages of grief, denial is the first one. Yeah. And you were just talking about that. You deny it. You don't want to believe that you're going through it. So, for example, and by the way, we're going through this stuff, and I think I mentioned this before, we want our listeners to sort of think about, as you're listening to this episode, thanks for listening, but as you're listening to this, to sort of, maybe check in with yourself and see if there are parts in your life that you may be in one of these stages and not realize it, because denial is the first thing that you do. You don't want to accept that that you're going through or you're going towards a loss. It's so painful. So my example is when I was married and it was on the rocks, and I didn't want to accept that there was, I was in complete denial. I was working. My friends, after my divorce, my friends said, we didn't even know you'd been through a divorce. I was so deep in denial. I wouldn't talk about it. I wouldn't talk about my loneliness. I wouldn't talk about how I denied it to myself. So what did I do? I worked. I worked and I worked and I worked. I did events. I went out to dinner with friends. I lost weight, gained weight, ate, had dinner parties. I did everything that I could do to fill every single possible hour with everything that I could do to keep me from facing the fact that this marriage was in deep, deep peril.
That's the proverbial 800-pound gorilla.
Yes.
That you didn't want to,
No.
and you will do anything, which means you'll build a successful business, but I am not going to face. That's what exactly. You can use that.
Yeah, because I would just try to fill up all this happiness,
Yeah.
good stuff, like great work. And there's so much going on. And, you know, when we were in therapy for years, and even therapy was a denial of what was impending. I remember towards the end when I went in to talk to, because even therapy was complicated, right? So we were seeing the therapist separately. And I remember when I finally came into acceptance and I walked into, and I'm jumping way ahead, but when I came into acceptance, I walked into my therapist and sat down and looked at him and I said, you know, I think it's time. We have to stick a fork in this. I think that this marriage is over. And he looked at me with this face like, you think? You think? Because it's time. And you know, it wasn't his place to tell me that. He was waiting for me to come into acceptance, which, you know, I could have strangled him at the time. And afterwards I said, why didn't you just tell me that it was over? He goes, because that's not my job to do.
Is to help you uncover the truth, right? The truth.
Like, for Pete's sake.
Yeah.
But he had this look on his face and we laughed about it. I said, oh my gosh. He's like, yeah, I was almost going to suggest that you have an affair or something to make this thing just finally implode.
Well, I think your therapist saw you because if he knew if he spoke the truth, he would have to immediately leave.
I would have fought him. What do you mean this marriage is over? I don't fail. I would have fought him on the end. But yeah. So denial.
Yeah.
Have you ever had something where you thought, okay, I think maybe your brother was in deep denial?
Yeah. So I had a family. My brother, when he had brain cancer, you know, they always say, get your affairs in order, get your house in order. And I had a conversation for about 2 seconds. And he said, you mentioned that again, well, and I won't talk to you. Basically, it was about, if you plan for death, that means you believe you're going to die. And if you don't, you're going to live. And so, you know, and it was, what did I do? I never brought it up again. So
and he never did his will. He never did a will.
Yeah. So no. So, but at any rate, he, that was his prerogative. Mm-hmm. And I understand why, because he didn't want to give any energy to the thought of him passing away. But, you know, and I didn't tell you this, he came down here to see me, and he had a bout where he fell down and couldn't get up, but he looked at me and says, the great judge in the sky told me that we all have a limited amount of time, and I'm okay with that. Well, he was an attorney, so the great judge in the sky, I mean, our God, whatever, he just told me that, and I could see it washed over him, and we literally rushed back up to Jacksonville, took him to the Mayo Clinic, and he passed away 2 weeks later.
Okay, so that was
and I noticed that. See, I'm healing because I don't get as it used to bust me up inside, but that's because
the memory of him is a blessing now.
It's a big blessing, and I've accepted the loss of that, his not being on this planet anymore to share the ups and downs of life with, because no one. I mean, you've got siblings, so things happen. When you're with siblings, when you're younger, good or bad, you experience it together. That way you don't feel you're alone. But once he was gone, you know, I felt alone. And probably I went through those stages when you were going through them this morning. I thought, man, I went through all those with my brother. I actually was angry. How could I get angry at my brother dying of cancer? Well, the thing is, selfishly, he left me here. Didn't leave me with anyone else to talk to about the things that we had gone through. Yeah. Who am I going to talk to now? No one will get it because he was there. And so that was my hang up. So I put a condition on my piece. I needed someone to share the pain like he had. And so I was looking for a replacement. There is no replacement for him. And I don't need to have somebody to share. It was nice while he was here. So that's why that was my big good fight, was overcoming that within myself, because it was blocking my peace.
But the denial, to get back to, because anger is the next one.
Yes.
And we definitely want to talk about that, because there's so many people are stuck in that anger phase. But to wrap up the denial part of it, I've seen this, and I know you have in the field of work that you're in, just to sort of give an example of what happens when people are stuck in that denial phase and they don't work through to acceptance of loss. The fallout can be so painful for so many. I know that in your family, had he had planned, maybe there wouldn't have been all the infighting that there was in your family.
I don't want to really, that's okay. I don't want to talk about that.
Well, that's...
I know.
Okay, so let me find an example in my life. So with my divorce, with the denying of it, I couldn't I got stuck, and I couldn't move forward into the other stages. And what happened was that I ended up in that marriage probably, I don't know how many years longer than I should have. I don't have any regrets about it, because I learn about it now. Actually, it's funny because you and I have talked about how with toxic relationships, toxic business relationships, personal relationships, I actually move through them a lot quicker. To a point where something is toxic, I see it, I'm out, like in a week, 2 weeks, a month, as opposed to years and years of just sitting in this pain. Now I identify it a lot faster and move through it, because I don't see the loss or the death of a relationship as this horrible, giant, painful thing.
Or as a giant symbol of failure.
Yeah, exactly. Or it just is what it is. And I actually embrace a loss so much faster and just sort of move it. I see losses now more as just a part of life.
It's an experience.
It's an experience.
Yeah.
When I started to embrace sadness, and I think we were talking about this week's been really painful with the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. To me, she's an idol, and I know to many. And I sat when her body was being laid in state on Monday. I just cried. I just cried and just accepted that loss and that pain. And it was okay to feel that. Did it hurt? Yeah. Did it suck? Totally. But, I just...
You move through it pretty...
Yeah, but sitting in the... moving towards acceptance and experiencing those feelings... I find much more... I don't know how to say it. I mean, when sadness happens, I don't want to do it, but I find that when I accept it, that... I can move through that, and it feels better on the other side. Like I know that I'm not going to be there forever.
Right.
So
you've experienced it.
Yeah.
Let it grow through it, move through you, but you don't hang on to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
when I sit in denial, it's horrible.
Yes.
Like, it's just terrible. I would much rather face it. Let me tell you a quick, as we move into anger with denial and the fear. When I was in workshops, in personal growth and development workshops, there was a story that one of the instructors told that I actually repeat in my head regularly when I find fear coming up. So he talks about how lions hunt in the jungle. So the older lions have a much louder, more powerful roar, and it terrifies people. But they're old, man. They cannot hunt. They can't run. They can't grab you. They can't do anything, right? Now, the younger lions have a much more puny roar. Roar, roar, roar. They're just not as scary because they're younger, right? But they're much faster, and they're much more agile and much more powerful. So the lions in the jungle, what they do is that the the older, more powerful roar lions will get on one side of the herd, while the younger, more powerful, less roarsome lions are on the opposite side. So what happens is that the louder lions will roar and roar and roar and roar, and the antelope, for lack of other, whatever the animals are at the time, they will run away from the roar because they're afraid, and they run right into the younger, more powerful lions that kill them, right? That hunt them, that run them down and kill them. So the antelope are running away from the roar. So what the story is, run towards the roar. Run towards what you're afraid of. And you'll find that you're much more able to handle it. When you run away, many times what you're running into is more frightening than the roar. So this
whole idea is about that, becoming aware of your loss, realizing it may be hanging you up. Grab the bull by the horns, face up to your own music, whatever that is. Yes.
It's usually not as frightening as what you think it's going to be.
And you'll feel really empowered once you do. But it's so that life of quiet desperation is really kind of being in a place where you feel stuck inside. And a lot of people, I think that's one of my favorite quotes, because I've been there so many times, and I thought, I can't be the only one that goes through this. And then you're trying to find a way out, but you don't go through life, you grow through life. And we all know when we're kind of stunted, we can feel it. Intuitively within ourselves, we're always trying to grow and become more than who we are. So.
Absolutely. So why don't we take a quick break here? Sounds good. On the other side of the break, we're going to talk about anger and bargaining. These two definitely, they go hand in hand.
Yes.
And a lot of us have been stuck there. So we'll be right back with this discussion on living with loss.
Thanks for listening. If you're enjoying this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and tell your friends. For more tips and ways to dig deep and get real, sign up for our newsletter, read blogs, and shop our merch at fightthegoodfightclub.com.
Hi, and welcome back to Fight the Good Fight Club with Cynthia and Marcel. And we have been talking about living with loss. And we've covered denial. So we're going through the stages of grief that help us deal with loss.
Correct. Loss in its many, many, many forms on this planet while we're alive. Loss of families, loss of dreams, loss of hopes, loss of marriages, loss of careers, loss of money, whatever it is, we experience
loss
a loss
of life, loss of
but within us, pets, people, it's all clumped into one word called loss, and we don't always realize that. Even though sometimes we go, well, losing a person is more important than losing a car or something, but deep within us, it's still a loss.
Yeah,
and so
definitely. So when a loss is coming upon us, first, of course, we go into denial. No, this isn't happening. Stop the madness. No. So once we've moved through denial and this loss is happening, the next thing that generally happens is, and there's no timing here. And by the way, this is just, Marcel and I are exploring this. This is, if you go to Wikipedia and you search the 5 stages of grief, you'll see this model that we're discussing. It's a model, or the Kubler Ross model, that talks about grief. There is no one way to go through it. And even now, going through COVID, a lot of people are going through a lot of loss or feeling of impending doom. So this might be helpful through this. But the next stage is anger. And this is a big one. It's powerful. It's what they say here is that when the individual recognizes that denial cannot continue, they become frustrated. And especially at proximate individuals. Certain psychological responses of a person undergoing this phrase would be, why me? it's not fair. How can this be happening to me?
I didn't deserve this.
Who is to blame for this? And then you start pointing fingers and blaming, especially when you're going through a business problem. When there's when there's problems in business, that's a huge finger pointing.
Absolutely.
Or in divorce.
Correct.
Finger pointing. It's his fault. It's your fault that we're going through this. Right?
Correct. And it's who dealt this card to me? This is unfair. Life's unfair. And you get angry because
you lied to me. You promised. You made promises to me.
And what's the old saying? It's not what happens to you or what is said to you, it's how you react.
Yeah.
And usually it's anger when you don't know any other way to react.
For sure.
So own it. Whether, okay, I was dealt this card, I own it. How am I going to play it? Whatever it may be. And that's been my personal coping mechanism, and it's worked for me. But a lot of this is about times that it didn't too, is trying to becoming aware of maybe the cards dealt you that you haven't accepted. You keep trying to throw it back in the deck, but it keeps popping back up.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's
so
perfectly
you get angry.
natural.
You get angry because you want to know who dealt that card.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who dealt it. You have it. And that's the whole idea behind healing through this grieving process, right?
Absolutely. But with anger though, it's natural. I think that the most important thing to understand is that it's natural to feel anger.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to go through loss. Even if someone, for example, receives a diagnosis of cancer, it's natural to get angry. Why? Especially, let's just say, for example, I remember sitting on the board for the American Cancer Society, the local board, and I remember that there was a gentleman who had gone through 3 bouts of lung cancer, and he had never smoked, super healthy, looked, did everything right. Don't you think that it would be really natural to be really, really angry at God, at this body?
Yeah.
How can this happen to me? I play by all the rules. Why is this happening to me?
Exactly.
And then there are people that get stuck in that anger and don't move on to the next phases to go into that spiritual place. But anger's natural.
It is natural. And the whole idea, the backdrop again to this whole course is really to realize where we come through this life, it's inevitable that we all leave this world. Mm-hmm. And it's to accept that first and foremost, but then somewhere along the line we get disillusioned, right? That we're trying to get something out of this life, and if we don't get it, we get frustrated. If there's a monkey wrench, we get thrown in it. This marriage is going great or whatever, and now look what happened. It's going to set me back the rest of my life, and all these thoughts, right? So, but ultimately, the thing that we would be ashamed we go through this life and don't find is the eternal beings that we are.
Absolutely.
And realize that that's who we are. So everything's just an experience.
Absolutely.
Losses, gains, whatever they may be, they're
so,
always,
absolutely. But when we're talking about anger, one thing that I think that people don't realize is our loved ones' anger.
Yeah.
And making room and space for our loved ones to feel angry and to support them through it. A great example of this is children of divorce.
Yeah.
The children will get caught up. They don't understand it. They're children, right? Even our adult children, but they're children, and they get angry. I've actually come into space where I've seen adults. They're going through divorce, and they've accepted it, and they're fine, and they're good, and it's an amicable divorce, and the kids lose their ever-loving minds because they want a family.
Yeah.
I know that in our family, my brother was really, really, really upset that we had a dysfunctional family. How rare is it that people have dysfunctional families, right?
The dysfunction is normal.
It's normal.
That's normal.
But, almost everyone has some sort of dysfunction in their family, right? Well, you're kind of going through it, and you stick your head up and you don't realize that the children are going through their own situation through divorce. So just because you're having this really amicable divorce doesn't mean that your children know how to manage divorce. So for us and our family, my brother, all he wanted was to have a normal family. Well, heck, we weren't normal. And my parents just weren't normal. And we had all kinds of stuff go on, and my brother really didn't care. So all the siblings, we've all gone through different ways of dealing with our dysfunctional family, and now we're all adults, and we're sort of coming into new families, into different ways of living our lives. But if that dysfunction or the anger wasn't resolved properly, now you go into another family, and now you're bringing this anger into your other family, and now there's all of this wreckage, right? Your new family doesn't satisfy you because you're trying to create the family that you didn't have to begin with.
Right.
And now you've got this new family, and now you're all bent because what you wanted, you thought, well, now I'm in power. Yeah. Now I'm going to create this new family. And I think that this actually brings us into the next.
Can I? So you said two, or one of them was normal. What is normal? How about things just are? That's the family you're born into, where whatever backdrop there was. I'm just going to say let's just say dysfunction. And I think most people know what that means. It's just, okay, but then there's another family that's perfect, but then kids grow up and they're dysfunctional from a normal. So the word normal, what it bodes
it's relative.
It's relative, but also it's anger comes from unmet expectations of things you, quote, wanted.
Yes.
And that's where I think it...
That's a great point. So that's a great point. Let's just pause for a second. The anger that comes from unmet expectations.
Yeah.
That's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
What are our expectations? Are they reasonable? Do they fit us? Are we doing this because do we have expectations because they're societal norms?
Right.
But yeah, I think that's an incredible point.
And let's say 2 generations from now, let's say that COVID is just as bad or worse and people can't go to graduations and graduate. It's going to be normal because hey, we can't graduate in groups, but they won't even know about graduating in groups. You follow what I'm saying? So this current generation who couldn't graduate, quote, the normal way we did, they're angry that COVID happened. You won't be able to throw your cap and gown on the hair.
Yeah, so they lost those years. They didn't get prom.
There was so the expectations of all that, and it's like that's kind of a loss. There's anger there.
Yeah.
So it's
all valid.
So this whole podcast came about is trying to deal with. So what I personally have done, I'm learning how to deal with anything that pops up like that, right? And so the Course in Miracles teaches things are what they are, and any meaning they have is the meaning you give them.
Sure, and we're actually going to go into that acceptance, but we're
Good
working.
Segue.
We're not there yet.
Okay,
there's 2 more steps.
Yeah.
We're jumping way ahead.
Yeah.
So we're going now to bargaining. Bargaining is another step that will keep us stuck on the way to acceptance. So let's talk about bargaining. What does that look like? If I do X, then I will get Y. And we make up these stories in our head to stop the inevitable loss.
Yeah.
Right? So let me go in here. Let's see. An example includes with the terminally ill person who's negotiating with God, right? To attend a daughter's wedding and attempt to bargain for more time to live in exchange for a reformed lifestyle or a phase such as if I could trade their life for mine. So there's all kinds of bargaining that happens to try to stop the inevitable. And there are people that will do this and just constantly set up these bargainings or these alternative realities in hopes or in a way to refuse to face the inevitable.
Right.
And then in doing that, things get stuck. They don't, I think, can I bring up your brother?
Sure.
Yeah. So he had some bargaining that he was going through, and you all are left here, but you didn't have the opportunity to say your goodbyes or maybe plan for or do things differently. And like your mom, for example, she deals with that loss, your siblings, you all are having to negotiate because there's this huge void that's left when someone dies.
Absolutely. Yeah,
you see what I'm saying? So
there's
it's
usually
bargaining.
some key figure in a family, a patriarch, matriarch, or whatever, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a parent or whatever, whoever, someone that everyone looks up to for whatever reason. And when that person goes, it's like the key link in the whole chain is gone, and therefore the whole chain just dismantles, which is actually what happened. But so when you say that bargaining, something came to me, and I find this happening more and more, that just getting more and more at peace because of this podcast, is when you say people bargain, and I know we're going through the steps of Kubler Ross, of the steps of the grieving process, but what are we bargaining for? We're bargaining for something we already have. We already have time, right? We would just more time or whatever. But we already have it. So it reminds of a quote, if well spent, there is enough time. So rather than accept the inevitable, be grateful for what we already have and bargain for no more. Just appreciate every single moment. And I think if we can really grasp onto that, we'll be less inclined to, quote, waste time, so that we're all on borrowed time. We've all been given the amount of time we already have. There is no more bargaining. You know, I realize my mother, we take a truckload of vitamins, and I say that every single day. And my mother's always going, well, if Sean took this particular vitamin, maybe he wouldn't have got. I said, Mama, he took vitamins. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. He had no vices that would harm his health. He loved working. He loved his family. He loved surfing. And I said, I didn't see room for cancer to squeeze in there or a reason for it to, but it did. And, you know, we can blame this person, that person, whatever, blame this person, whatever. He got it, bottom line. And the point was that she keeps trying to backtrack and think of what if. She's still bargaining that, or kind of trying to cope with his passing. And I'm trying to help her through it, you know. And helping her through it is helping me through it. So, but again, it's almost like we're all on borrowed time, and that's what we don't see all the time. That's why when something tragic happens to someone else, it triggers a fear. Oh God, you know, that's why it's better to attend a funeral than a wedding, right? A funeral makes you more aware of how fragile life is, you know, whereas you go to a wedding, and I think that's a famous quote, better to attend a funeral than a wedding, because a wedding is like, oh, hunky-dory and everything, all the promises and everything, that's great. But a wedding reminds you that you just don't have enough time, and you start thinking, wow, maybe that's going to be me one day. I don't want to go that way. We don't always know how we're going to go. So this whole idea of living with, and the bargaining idea, what are we bargaining for? We already have time, but we should realize that we all have, quote, some type of death sentence, so for lack of a better word, and just appreciate. And that's why I personally want to keep doing this stuff, because I'm appreciating this moment more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. But in terms of bargaining, I definitely want our listeners to understand, just because I want them, maybe they're going through this, I know I did.
Yeah.
A bargaining that happens all the time is like in my divorce or in my marriage when it was failing, I was thinking, if I do X, then Y, which is what we're talking about, right? If I lose weight, he'll love me more.
Right.
And
maybe the marriage will get better.
Exactly. If I work harder and be more successful and bring home more money, he'll love me more.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
Those are the bargains that we make. But the reality is, let's say I've lost the weight, I've worked harder, brought home more money. Now what? The reality is that this marriage was doomed anyway.
And they're conditions, right?
Exactly.
So that's conditional happiness, right?
Yes.
And it isn't love's supposed to be unconditional.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. So once we've done all of our bargaining and we've seen that it doesn't work, inevitably what happens next is depression sets in. So I'm so sad. Why bother with anything? I'm going to die soon. So what's the point? Or I miss my loved one. Why go on? Why get into another relationship?
Yeah.
It's only going to fail.
Yeah.
And then we fall into this rut.
Yeah.
So stage 4 of going through grief, after you've gone through denial, anger, bargaining, because we're working through this, man. We're just not going to go to this loss. This loss is not going to happen. And we get to this final stage before we get to acceptance where we get completely like nothing has worked. The bargaining hasn't worked. Nothing has worked. Now I just feel hopeless. Yeah. Why have another relationship? Why, why try? And then you get into bed. You don't want to come out. And this is a stage where a lot of people just get really, really, really stuck because there's just no hope. There's nothing that I can do that's going to make this better. Is there any time where you have felt where you've gone into a depression where you just felt that it's not going to get better? What's the point?
Yes, I have. Let me trying to think of the dozen or two times. I think it was that one time, I may have shared this before, but there was this heated argument in a marriage, and I just I didn't want to look in the mirror because I'm convinced there was just a bloodied face. And so I walked outside and I literally lay down in the driveway in the form of a giant X, looking for a cloud, hoping there was a lightning bolt about to strike out of it and put me out of my misery.
You just, the total despair. And you said your neighbor saw you from across.
I had my eyes, and I was just spent. I had given up. I surrendered to whatever. I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. And I hear this laughter. And I open my eyes. It's my neighbor going, ha, ha, laughing at me. And he says,
well, you're lying. Let's just set up this picture. Marcel is laying in the ground in his driveway with his arms spread out and with his eyes just closed.
Literally the form of an X, like X marks the spot, lightning bolt. Here's where you want to strike.
You wanted the heavens to just open up and strike you. It's like, I'm here, God, strike me down.
But the sad truth, I really felt that way. I was just so spent.
You were done.
I wasn't thinking about anything else that would be a good reason to not feel that way.
And your
but my neighbor,
you.
the classic, he starts laughing. He knew, but the fun.
If you enjoy our podcast, we invite you to subscribe to Fight the Good Fight Club on YouTube. Hit the notification button and give us a thumbs up. Also, head over to fightthegoodfightclub.com and sign up for the newsletter, read blogs, and more. Thanks for listening.